This is the 1950s Research Paper Conference. You should have in front of you the 1950s research guide posted on the class webpage that looks like what I have on the screen right now. The 1950s topic is the 1950s are called an era of peace, prosperity, and progress. Your job in this paper is to decide whether that is an accurate way to describe the 1950s in the United States. Your paper should focus primarily on American events. First thing that I would recommend that you do is actually start with defining the terms peace, prosperity, and progress. You need to use a paper dictionary. You are not allowed to use online websites, and online dictionaries are not considered appropriate. A paper dictionary counts as a source. You can find multiple different dictionaries in the library. So you'll actually create note cards with definitions for these three. Please note when we're talking about prosperity, we're talking about economic prosperity. So please choose the appropriate definition. Once you have definitions for those three terms, then you want to actually start your research for your body paragraphs, where you're going to look at these three categories: peace, prosperity, and then finally progress. And you're going to evaluate whether you think it really was an era of peace, prosperity, and progress or not. Note, in the end, when you make your argument, all three terms have to be applicable. In other words, you are arguing it either was an era of peace, prosperity, and progress, or it was not an era of peace, prosperity, and progress. You cannot say it was an era of peace, but not progress. Okay, so after you define those three terms, then you're going to choose one of the topics. One of your paragraphs will be on peace, one will be on prosperity, again, economic prosperity, and finally, one will be on progress. You can either focus on science and technological progress or civil rights. Please don't combine them. It makes the paper sound funny. You can start researching whichever topic interests you the most, and what I would recommend is that you use these key terms as a starting place. You don't have to use these terms, but these are the terms that I recommend that you at least look at as guidance. You can look at these terms. What you're going to do with these terms is you're going to look them up either in the index of a book, or you can simply search for these terms in one of the databases. Take notes on the terms and learning what they are. You may find information that'll help you with background for your analysis. You may find eventually quotes that you can actually use to prove your argument. At this point, you're just writing down everything you can find. If you aren't sure what a term means, for example, what MAD stands for, please make sure that you ask me for clarification so I can help you. Once you've done some note cards for peace, move on to another topic like prosperity or progress and continue to gather note cards. After you gathered significant number of note cards, I would say 5 to 10 for each of the topics, I would go through them. And what you want to do is you want to look to see where the preponderance of evidence is. Does it look like you have more cards promoting peace, prosperity, and progress, or more cards saying it was not an era of peace, prosperity, and progress? Then you just simply go with where the cards lead you. This is step 2 right here under body paragraph. So step 1, research those key terms listed below. Step 2, decide how you're going to argue. When you're doing your research with these terms, you'll notice that there is not a definitive argument. In other words, some of these terms reflect peace, some of them contradict peace. I just gave you a whole bunch of terms as a starting place. Okay. So once you've decided how you're going to argue, you need to make sure, we're at this third bullet point here, we need to make sure that each body paragraph has 3 unique pieces of evidence. In other words, when you're writing your peace paragraph, you cannot just talk about McCarthy, or you cannot just talk about Open Skies proposal. You need to have 3 different pieces of evidence, 3 quotes on 3 of these different topics that prove that it was or was not an era of peace. In terms of the prosperity paragraph, I would note that statistics are important for the prosperity paragraph. So look for numbers, data that talks about things like the high unemployment rate or low unemployment rate, things like the GDP or GNP, and look for those actual numbers. Finally, you will of course need to analyze your evidence, and all of your research is going to help you with that, with both background information as well as, of course, the quotes that prove your evidence. In your analysis, the part A, you're going to be describing what was going on before this era primarily. If you're saying that the 1950s was an era of peace, then you'd be describing about how before the 1950s, there of course was a global conflict called World War II going on. So remember that when you're doing research, you're not just researching for direct quotes that prove an argument, you're also researching information that simply helps you understand the era that can help you in your analysis as well. Okay, in terms of places to go to look for information, I'm going to take you on a tour of where to go in the library on one of our research days, but you also have some sources readily available to you. For example, chapter 18 and 19 of your textbook cover the 1950s. In addition, there are lectures posted on the class webpage that talk about the 1950s. We haven't studied it yet, but our next 2 units will cover this decade. Those lectures are all posted on the class webpage, so you can access them at any point. If you have any evidence on the Red Scare, there's also a reading on the class webpage that might be helpful to you. Please note, your textbook and lecture do not count as one of the 5 sources, but they're good for background information, they're good for your introduction, they're good for your analysis, so you can take note cards off of those 2 sources. Finally, we do have the introduction. Okay, so in the introduction, you will be talking about these 3 terms and those definitions. You're also going to include some background information about life before the 1950s. You do have to have research for your introduction, and all the facts that you present in your introduction do have to be cited. You're just simply paraphrasing those facts. You'll also be introducing the 1950s, focusing on some of the themes of the era. This will become easier to you once we've studied the 1950s in our next 2 units. That's all I have for right now. If you have questions while you're doing research, please make sure that you ask me those questions, or of course you can always email me questions or come in during Access for help. Thanks.